The beginning. The river had always been my escape. After the divorce in 2012, I found myself drawn again and again to Mount Hood. Every weekend I would pack my gear into the back of my battered Toyota, drive up from Portland before dawn, and throw myself into the rapids. The white spray, the cold bite of the current, the pounding of water against stone. These were things that made me forget the hollow silence of my apartment and the weight of mistakes that lingered like ghosts. On the surface, rafting was about adrenaline, but for me, it was about erasure. Each rush of water stripped away another layer of regret. That June, I wasn't alone. Tim and Brian were with me, two old friends who had watched me spiral through the divorce, two men who had their own demons to drown. Tim was wiry, sarcastic, and always looking for trouble, the kind of guy who would poke a hornet's nest just to see what flew out. Brian, on the other hand, was quieter, heavier in frame and in spirit, a man who carried sorrow like an anchor but rarely spoke of it. We didn't plan much beyond survive the rapids, but fate had other plans. It was late afternoon, the sun casting gold across the river. Our raft bounced through a narrow section, walls of jagged rock rising on either side. My arms burned from paddling, my throat raw from laughing and yelling over the roar. Then the current shifted. A swirling eddy pulled us toward the left bank, toward a break in the stone wall. "Hey, what the hell is that?" Tim shouted, pointing with his paddle. At first, I thought it was just a dark shadow, a cave where the water had chewed into the cliff. But as we drifted closer, the shadow sharpened into shape. It wasn't a cave. It was a doorway. Not wooden, not metal, something else entirely. The stone itself seemed to have been smoothed into an arch, every curve deliberate, every surface carved. Symbols snaked along the frame, lines and spirals and jagged edges that twisted if you looked too long, like they were moving just beneath your skin. "Jesus Christ," Brian whispered, "that's not natural." We sat there, water lapping against the raft, staring at the impossible. The river had revealed something ancient, something hidden. Tim grinned, his eyes bright. "We're going in." "Like hell we are," Brian snapped. He was gripping his paddle like a weapon, knuckles white. "Look at that thing. It's wrong." I swallowed hard, torn between fascination and dread. "It's probably just some old mining tunnel, right? People used to dig around here. Could be historical." But even as I said it, the words tasted like lies. Tim jabbed his paddle toward the archway. "Come on. When do we ever get a chance like this? We're talking history, treasure, maybe even some lost pioneer shit. Don't tell me you don't want to know." Brian shook his head. "Some doors are closed for a reason." Silence hung between us, broken only by the rush of water. My heart hammered. Curiosity nodded at me, stronger than fear. The divorce had left me reckless, hungry for something bigger than my pain. I found myself saying, "Just a quick look. If it's nothing, we come back." Brian swore under his breath, but he didn't stop us. And so we paddled toward the stone door. Inside, the air was colder. The spray of the river faded, replaced by a silence that pressed on the eardrums. Our headlamps cut across walls of slick stone, illuminating the strange carvings. They weren't random. They formed patterns, circles within circles, jagged shapes that made my temples ache when I stared too long. "Feels like a goddamn church," Tim muttered, voice echoing. "Not any church I've seen," Brian replied. The tunnel sloped upward, water dripping from the ceiling. After maybe 50 feet, the raft could go no further, so we dragged it onto a rocky ledge and pressed deeper on foot. That's when I noticed it. The symbols weren't just on the walls, they were on the floor too, etched into the stone in long spirals, like trails meant to be followed. And at the center of one spiral lay bones. They weren't animal, I knew that instantly, though part of me prayed I was wrong. A rib cage splayed open like a broken umbrella. A skull cracked down the middle, teeth bared in a final scream. Around it, smaller fragments, fingers, toes, scattered like offerings. Brian gagged, stumbling back. "Nope, no, we are leaving." Tim crouched, shining his light closer. His face was pale, but his curiosity burned hotter than his fear. "These are old, really old. Look at the way the stone's worn. This isn't murder, it's ritual." The word sent a shiver through me. Ritual. I could feel the walls pressing closer, the carvings almost vibrating. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. "Guys," I said, voice low, "we shouldn't be here." But even as I spoke, something pulled me deeper. We moved on, deeper into the dark. I couldn't explain why. Logic screamed to leave, but some invisible thread tugged me forward, like the tunnel itself had wrapped fingers around my ribs. Tim led, beam darting across carvings. Brian followed reluctantly, muttering prayers under his breath. I brought up the rear, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. The tunnel widened into a chamber. At its center rose a stone altar. Flat, waist-high, carved with the same twisting symbols. Dark stains marred its surface, stains that didn't look like rust. Above the altar, the ceiling opened into a jagged shaft, a natural chimney. Moonlight filtered down in a pale beam, illuminating the altar like a stage. And on the altar lay something wrapped in rotted cloth. Tim didn't hesitate. He strode forward, peeling back the cloth. I wanted to stop him. God, I wanted to. But my voice caught in my throat, frozen by the same force that had led us here. The bundle fell open. Inside was a book. Not paper, not leather, something in between. The cover was dark, almost oily, covered in symbols that writhed when you looked directly at them. Pages curled like dried skin. Tim touched it, and the chamber seemed to breathe. The air grew heavy, thick as syrup. My ears rang with a low hum, not heard, but felt, vibrating in the marrow of my bones. Shadows stretched along the walls, working into shapes that didn't match ours. Brian shouted, "Drop it! Drop it!" His voice cracked in terror. But Tim clutched the book tighter, eyes wide, pupils blown like he was staring into the sun. "It's talking to me," he whispered. And then we all heard it. A voice, not through ears, but inside our skulls. A whisper sliding across the brain like a knife over soft fruit. "You opened the door. Now you belong to us." The whisper didn't fade. It coiled in the air like smoke, curling into my ears even when I pressed my palms hard against them. The others heard it too. I saw it in their faces. Tim's pupils were wide, shimmering with something between terror and awe. Brian's jaw tightened, and he shook his head like he could rattle it loose. "Stop," Brian muttered. "God, make it stop." But it didn't. The whisper wasn't sound in the usual way. It wasn't a voice carried on air. It was inside, crawling under thought, stitching itself into us. Tim clutched the book tighter against his chest. His knuckles were bloodless, his breathing sharp and fast. "It's not telling us to leave," he said, voice trembling. It's giving us something. Knowledge." "Knowledge my ass," Brian snapped. "That thing's poison. You saw the bones down here. You think they were blessed with wisdom? They were slaughtered." I didn't say anything. I was too busy listening, trying to separate the whisper from my own thoughts. But the more I focused, the more I realized it was my thoughts now. It spoke in my own voice, only twisted, urging me to stay, to kneel before the altar, to open myself like a page for the book to write upon. The air shifted. The torches sputtered as though an unseen wind pushed them. Shadows stretched longer than they should have. The carvings in the walls rippled faintly, like stone turned liquid for a second before hardening again. "We're leaving," I said, forcing strength into my voice. "Now." Tim stepped back toward the altar, hugging the book like a child would cling to a stuffed toy. "You don't understand. This is bigger than us. We've been chosen." "Chosen?" Brian barked a laugh, harsh and hollow. "You sound insane." He grabbed Tim's arm, but Tim yanked away with a surprising force. The whisper thickened, crowding the chamber, wrapping around Tim louder than the rest of us. His lips moved, echoing words none of us could understand. Not English, not any language I'd ever heard. Sharp, broken syllables that made my teeth ache just hearing them. The altar pulsed with faint light. "No," I said again, heart hammering, "we're not staying another second." I lunged for Tim, but the chamber itself seemed to react. The floor shuddered violently, dust raining from the stone ceiling. From the corners of the room, dark cracks spread across the walls like veins, glowing faintly red beneath their surface. The smell of iron and rot filled my nose. Brian grabbed my arm. "We need to move, now." We pulled Tim by force. He screamed, thrashing like a wild animal, but panic gave us strength. Together we dragged him from the altar and toward the tunnel we'd come from. That's when the whisper changed. It grew angry. The tone shifted from luring sweetness to a guttural command, a roar beneath our skulls. My knees buckled. Tim shrieked, and the book in his arms blazed with a sickly yellow glow. For an instant, I swear I saw shapes in the light, figures draped in robes, faces hidden, circling us in silence. We ran. The tunnel walls seemed to breathe as we pushed through them, throbbing with some unseen pulse. The light from our flashlights stuttered, dimming, flaring, dimming again. Tim stumbled, still clutching the book, but we didn't dare leave him behind. Every corner we turned seemed wrong. Distances stretched. I could have sworn the tunnel back to the river was short, but now it twisted endlessly, splitting into passages I didn't remember. "They're changing," Brian panted. "The tunnels, they're moving." Something echoed behind us, a scraping, like claws dragging against stone. We didn't look back. The air grew thick, harder to breathe. Whispers slithered along the walls, multiplying, layering, until it felt like a crowd pressed around us, murmuring, waiting. We burst into a wider cavern, unfamiliar, jagged, with stalactites dripping black water. I skidded to a stop, chest heaving. This isn't the way out. Brian spun, flashlight beam cutting across the walls. No exit. Only dark mouths of more tunnels, each one yawning open like a throat. Tim collapsed onto his knees, the book still against him. He was crying now, whispering those same alien words through sobs. "Burn it," Brian said, pointing. "We burn it and we're free." I wanted to agree. Every instinct screamed that the book was the anchor for all of this. But looking at it, I felt frozen. Some part of me, deep, traitorous, didn't want to destroy it. It felt like ripping out my own heart. Tim clutched it tighter. "You don't understand. It's alive. It chose us. If we destroy it, it'll destroy us." "Good," Brian growled. He yanked the book from Tim's arms. The moment he did, the cavern erupted with sound. Not whispers, screams. Dozens, hundreds, rising together in a deafening chorus. The walls bled shadow. Figures peeled themselves from the stone, half-formed shapes that flickered between human and something far worse. Brian tore at the book, trying to rip pages free, but the parchment wouldn't tear. His lighter sparked once, twice, then died. The figures moved closer, circling. "We're dead," Tim sobbed. "We're already dead." "No!" My voice cracked, but I forced it louder. "There has to be a way out." I didn't wait for agreement. I scanned the cavern and spotted a thin crack of light in the wall, faint but real. It had to be. "Here!" I shouted, pulling both of them. We bolted, the shadows surging closer, hands stretching from their bodies like smoke. One brushed against my arm, and a cold like death itself seared through me. My skin blistered where it touched. I screamed but didn't stop. We reached the light. It wasn't a door, it was a fracture in the stone, too narrow. Brian shoved at it desperately, fingers bleeding as he tried to widen the crack. The whispers rose again, shaking the cavern. Tim wailed behind us. Then the ground split. The altar's light, impossibly far back, flared again, and the tunnel screamed with it. Stone shadowed above us. A boulder cracked loose and fell between me and Tim. Dust blinded me, choking. When it cleared, I saw only Brian at my side. Tim was gone. "Tim!" I yelled, my voice bounced hollowly. I couldn't see him, only the glow of the book on the other side of the rubble. He wasn't crying anymore. His voice was calm now, eerily calm, chanting. The shadows pressed close to him, like children around a parent. Brian grabbed my arm. He's gone. I wanted to fight, wanted to claw through stone, drag Tim back. But the shadows were surging, pouring through cracks, their faces splitting wider and wider until there was no room left to breathe. Brian shoved me toward the fracture. "Move!" We squeezed through. The rock tore at our skin, scraping, shredding clothes. Behind us, the screams reached a crescendo, then cut to silence. We stumbled into daylight. The forest greeted us, the river glittering a short distance away. The sun was rising, pale gold on the horizon. For a long moment, I just stood there, sucking in air like I'd been drowning. We made it out. But the silence that followed wasn't relief. Brian sank onto a rock, staring at his shredded hands. His face was gray, hollow. He didn't look at me. Neither of us spoke. From somewhere deep in the tunnels behind us, a faint echo drifted out. A whisper. Familiar. I froze. Brian's eyes flicked up. He'd heard it too. It wasn't gone. I don't remember the hike back to the raft, don't remember pushing down the river. Everything blurred, dreamlike, until we reached our cars. But that night, when I finally lay in bed, sleep didn't come. I heard it again. Soft at first, then stronger. The same whisper. And this time, it didn't just crawl through my thoughts. It spoke, clearly, my name.